As a conservative, one of the things that I would really like to do is to talk a little bit about some of the principles of the Republican Party, more specifically of conservatism. And one such principle that I'd like to talk about today is personal responsibility. It's something that you hear a lot about in conservative circles, personal responsibility. And I understand that there are people on the left who view that as a way to sort of buck compassion and reaching out and helping other people. But that's not what personal responsibility is all about. Personal responsibility is not about turning your head away from those who are in need. Personal responsibility is about empowerment. And I think it's so important, particularly where we are right now as a nation, that each individual takes stock of how we can be personally responsible for our lives. I want to say right away, however, that we do live in the greatest country on the face of the earth, and I'm so grateful that we do have things in place to help people when they are in need. And conservatives believe in that also. We do believe in giving people a hand up. But the key word there is up. We want to help people when they're in need of help, but we want to lift them up so that they can then progress on their own. That to me is what true compassion is all about. It's about allowing this message to go forth so that everybody understands that they can pick themselves up, and when you find yourself in a situation where you need a hand up, then you reach up and you grab that hand, but you don't just hold on to that hand for generation after generation after generation. If you really care about people, you know that when they can help themselves, when they can get up and walk on their own, they're going to feel better about themselves. Their families are going to feel better about where they are. And so personal responsibility is about empowering people, and it's about caring about people, and it's about wanting to push people forward into the destiny that awaits them. And as a black conservative, I spoke recently in Cape Girardeau, Missouri, about conservatism and the black community. And one of the things that I talked about was how on the left, they don't want to hear about morals. They always talk about how conservatives or Republicans are pushing their morals on other people, and they think that you know just stay out of my business, and you know whenever you start talking about morality, when you start talking about behavior, when you start talking about being responsible for your own behavior, then they want to shut you off. And then, of course, the people on the right are just preaching to them, or the people on the right are pushing their values on them. But when we live in a time where I am expected to pay for your behavior, I think it only makes sense that we stop and have a conversation about your personal responsibility for your behavior. And within the black community in particular, I'm absolutely gripped, for example, by the situation facing the black family. When, as I understand it, 7 out of 10 of our children are born out of wedlock. And some say that it's more than 70% now, it's more like 75%. 70 or 75, whatever it is, it's alarming. That amount of babies being born out of wedlock has to make us concerned, has to make us stop and say, listen, we have to talk about how we are going to take responsibility for our lives and for our behavior, which affects our families and which affects our future. You can't ignore the importance that plays on unemployment, on crime, obviously on poverty. We've got to get a hold of how we're living. We can't expect other people to pay for our situation, and then we don't want them to speak to the condition that we're in. We don't want them to, what we call, push their morality upon us. And I'm not just talking about black Americans. I mean, that as a black American, that stands out for me and that concerns me. But whether you're white or Hispanic or black or Asian or whatever, when you have that kind of situation that you're dealing with, we've got to talk about, we've got to take personal responsibility, and we have to talk about our behavior and how our behavior affects society as a whole, how our behavior has allowed us to be in the situation that we're in. And if we're going to move forward, we can't leave that conversation out, and that's something that concerns me on with Republicans, with some conservatives who feel the pressure from the left to keep your values, to keep your morals, to keep your social issues out of our business. And sometimes we buy into that, but we can't buy into that because it affects every aspect of our lives, and it affects all of us. So we have got to get a hold of this thing. And I shared during that speech that I gave in Cape Girardeau, Missouri, I shared something that a former pastor had talked about, which I think is extremely powerful, and we need to think about it. He talked about how if a dog is attacking a person, it would be foolish for a group of people to rush out and just start taking bandages and start wrapping it around that person where the dog has attacked, where the blood is, where the gashes are. We're just going to start wrapping it around, wrapping it around. That will do no good until you first get the dog off the person. Once you get the dog off the person, then you can start taking care of what the dog has done. And I think too often we don't want to talk about personal responsibility. We don't want to talk about what our behavior has wrought. Instead, we want to come along and we want to put band-aids and bandages over things. We've got to get to the root of the problem and not just deal with symptoms. We have a lot of symptoms in the community, in the Black community and other communities as well. There are lots of symptoms, but there's also a root problem. And the root of the problem has to be dealt with. We cannot ignore that and then expect progress. Progress requires diagnosing the problem. Progress requires getting the dog off. And until we are willing to have these kinds of conversations about behavior, about values, we're going to find ourselves going around the same mountain again and again and again. And we're not getting anywhere that's going to help anyone. So personal responsibility is just one aspect of the conservative message, and I think we must continue to talk about it. And I think that once we do that, and once we are real, and once we are open, and once we are honest and transparent, then I think we can start talking about some other ways in which we can go forward. But first, let's stop putting a Band-Aid on things. Let's start dealing with the dog.